he tried to alert the people that were sitting there, run. And of course they're what's it? And he literally sat there and watched those people become dinner. And when he gets to the top of the sand dune, he sees Lovett being dragged by this long metal arm and it's got a hold of one leg, and it's dragging him up into the spaceship. Yeah, she was found in a ditch, just tore to pieces, and they said it was a pack of wild dogs. So the cops hunted down every wild dog in the area. They put them all to death, and the DNA that those dogs, none of them matched the DNA found on her body. And right before his eyes, he saw this man who had turned and fired on this thing a couple of times. This reached the man, grabbed his head, and twisted it off. Just the tent looks like something from behind just ripped it open, and everything's left there, but there's no people. He had missing genitalia. His rectum had been drilled out. He was missing an eye, and his lower jaw had been removed. Well, my name is Neoma Finn, and I am a writer and an editor and a YouTube creator. And I love the strange and the unusual, which is why I adore Josh. And I am so thrilled to be here and to be hanging out with you. You can check out my channel if you got a chance. Neoma Finn, Open to Doubt, because what I put on my channel is mostly true, but there might be a little bit of doubt involved. I wanted to do this before we hit recording, but tell me a little bit about you, Josh. I want to know where you started with this. Did you have an experience of some kind, or are you one of us that just has weird things happen in life?
That's a good question. So, growing up, I always kind of thought the paranormal and Bigfoot were like really interesting. My mom actually had a fascination with Bigfoot. She's never had an experience, but growing up, we lived in the Northwest. And I remember there was one time where I was about 8 years old, and we had to drive up in Washington State around Mount St. Helens. I don't remember the wedding or who it was for, but I remember driving up there. We stopped this little gift shop, and I remember like there was Bigfoot stuff. And that was like one of the first times, one of the first few times my mom like really kind of talked to me about Bigfoot and things like that. And just, I don't know, I was so like fascinated by it, but I wasn't like obsessed, because I was just a kid, but the topic was really interesting. I hadn't seen anything of like the Patty stuff or any of that. But as I got older, I kind of started to like watch more just like the paranormal shows and like, of course, I'm talking about like a span of years here. It wasn't like all of a sudden I got obsessed, like there was one show in particular. I remember it really stuck out to me. And it used to be, I want to say it was on the Sci-Fi Channel or the Discovery Channel. And it was like where they would take people and like families, maybe 4 or 5 people, and they'd put them in these like really haunted locations. They'd have to stay the night for like 12 hours and survive, and I remember the one episode in particular, and if people listen to this, they'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It aired in like the early 2000s. There was an island off the coast, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it was called Isla Sorna, or maybe I'm thinking of Jurassic Park. I don't know. There was an island.
Well, were there dinosaurs or were there?
Oh yeah, paranormal dinosaurs, man. No, it was a haunted. I think it used to be like a church or an asylum, and just a lot of stuff there. There was also the like the Vlad's Castle as well that people had to stay in. Gosh, I'll put the name of the show in post so people are like, oh yeah. Anyway, I remember that show really stuck out to me. You had shows that were like Paranormal Witness, things like that, where people would talk about it. They had the reenactments. I thought those were really interesting. I remember in my early 20s, I kind of started Finding Bigfoot. I don't know, just super interesting, but I don't think it was later until I kind of like got into the Cundiff's thing, like the whole dog, because I didn't know like that was a thing. And then I started listening to his thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, like the whole werewolf archetype is an actual like cryptid that people, report seeing. And so this would have been about 2014. So I got really hooked in that. And then it wouldn't have been until like around 2017 where I started working this job, I basically worked at a weed shop, and there you go, folks. Your boy was slinging dope legally. Yeah. And so at the time I had about a 45-minute drive from home. So I would close the shop, and this is about 10 p.m. I'd have to do the nightly drops, do all that stuff, close the shop and drive home. And so, yeah, right. It was like this long, desolate road, 22 miles, you know. I had two weird things on this road happen, which I'll get to in a second. But for whatever reason, I remember one day, I think it was like in the fall or something like that, where I was like, oh, I need something to listen to on the way home. And for whatever reason, kind of like scary stories kind of came to my head. I don't know why. And I remember I somehow stumbled that there's a YouTuber by the name of Swamp Dweller. And I started listening to his stuff. And, you know, he covers, I'm pretty sure a lot of it's like fictional, but at the time I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then also I found Dark Waters, and I really liked his stuff as well. I think his is more nonfiction, but again, I'm not sure. I remember the exact spot on the road where I had the idea of like, hey, you know what? I could do this. Like, why not? Right? Like, let's just see what happens. And I remember I had the thought, I'm like, I know exactly what I'll call it too. I think I was just picking a random name. I'm like, what lurks beneath? I'm like, yeah, let's just roll. Let's just see what happens. Right. You know? And so, yeah, I want to say it was like December I made the channel. And from there, I kind of just started doing like first person narrations, and I did that for a little while. And then it kind of just, you know, somehow grew. And then at some point, I would say like few years later, I was like, I'm kind of getting really bored of like this like first person narration thing. And I'd always kind of wanted to do a show, like, you know, like a show where I kind of like I have now, where I could talk about more strange things. And so I'd really say like kind of getting tired of the whole like first person thing was kind of feeling too one dimensional for me. So I wanted to take it the next step, and somehow, you know, I didn't realize you could story tell like cases and actual events the way you can now. And so like, obviously, you know, around 2020, 2021, Mr. Ballen was really exploding. You know, everybody, that's no secret to anybody. I remember seeing his stuff and I was like, dude, like he's a genius. Like he figured out the format like that's it. Like I didn't realize you can do that. And so really, like, you know, a lot of my stuff initially was inspired by that kind of format where you could take something and tell the story as is. Now for me, I get a lot of my storytelling influence from my father, and you know, growing up, he was always just so expressive and over the top, and he's very loud, and he's not a quiet, reserved, hands to your side person. So that, you know, I kind of just channel my inner Angelo. so that's really, you know, I pair those two things, or those two influences and styles, and I've kind of like, you know, I've sprinkled in my own thing over time and make it my own. But that's basically the I guess the full length version of how we got from like here to there. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, what about you? Yeah.
Well, I guess I started more with the old documentaries that would appear. There was one that was James Arness's brother. I can never think of his name. He had gray hair. Peter Graves. He narrated one, and it's very, very similar to one that was also narrated by the guy who, oh my gosh, iconic man. He did The Twilight Zone.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Why is his name suddenly causing me to draw a blank? Imagine if you will. I can't think of his name. I'm sure somebody will, but the two documentaries were almost identical, except for one was narrated by Peter Graves and the other one was narrated by that man. And then there was, of course, Nova episode, I think, or no, In Search Of. And,
with Leroy. Yeah.
And they were all, you know, Bigfoot and or
not Leroy, Leonard, right?
Leonard. Nimoy.
Yeah,
I thought you said Nimoy.
Leonard Nimoy.
See, you said Leroy. I heard Nimoy. I was good with it.
A little dyslexic there.
Sorry. But anyway, and so I would get really wrapped up in watching those things. And then there was this series of books, and they were little they were called, they had names like Stranger Still, and Stranger Than Fiction, and they were all written by the same guy, Frank somebody. I started to say Frank Frazetta. No, not him. He was an artist, not a writer. And then weird things started happening in my life. And none of them were cryptid related. They were all like paranormal related. And I can remember the strangest when I was a little girl. And I don't know if I'm sharing some of the stuff twice. I'm sorry, but I have a tendency to repeat myself. I think I might have been about 6 or 7 years old. And we lived in Illinois, where we lived at the top of this huge hill, best sled riding hill in the state of Illinois. And it was my backyard. But in the summertime, because the top part of the hill, the hill really went really steep, and then it would just go, and it was probably about 2 acres long. We're talking the best sled riding hill ever. But I happened to be 6 or 7 years old. It was getting to be almost, the sun was still in the sky, but it was really close to the horizon. And my best friend and I, we had matching pajamas, and she was 12 days older than me. And we had known each other since we were 2. We were like this. And we still are. 58 years later, and we are still like this. And, but we were playing in the backyard, and what we would do is we would run as fast as we could to the hill, and we'd jump off and then land down here. So we would weird. But anyway, and of course we played King of the Hill there and all kinds of fun stuff. But we happened to be out in the backyard playing, and all of the neighbors would come over to my mom and dad's, and my mom would make a great big pitcher of sweet tea and another great big pitcher of Kool-Aid, and the kids would drink the Kool-Aid, and she'd drink, the adults would drink the sweet tea. My parents were not drinkers, but of course many of the neighbors were, so they'd bring over their 6-pack of beer or whatever, and they would sit around in the front yard in the lawn chairs, and they would talk until about dark, and then everybody would go home, and all of the kids would play. And I remember my best friend and I were in the backyard. Why it was just the 2 of us, I don't know, because there must have been 100 kids in that neighborhood. And we looked out on the horizon, or Amy, my best friend, she went between the houses. I don't know if she saw what I saw before I did and ran away, but she turned and ran. And I looked out, and straight out at eye level, which would have been, of course, because of this hill, about, was a second sun. That's all I can tell you, is it looked exactly like the sun sitting over here in the west that was almost touching the horizon, but it was right in front of me. Now, it could have been a weather balloon for all I know, because I was a little kid. But what I can tell you is that I turned around to run away. And when I did, it was night. As fast as I turned around, it turned completely dark. And I came around to the front of the house, and my mom yelled at me for being outside. She said, "I thought you went to bed hours ago." And I don't know what it was. I mean, I don't know if it was a weather balloon, if I had some kind of a memory loss. All I know is that there's definitely missing time. I saw it out there. I turned to run around to the front to get my mom. And when I turned around, it was dark. I don't know where my friend was. I think she had run away before me. And my mom yelled at me because she thought I had been in the house for hours and asleep. That's probably the earliest thing I can remember having happened. Then when I was about 14, my parents, maybe I was 15, my parents divorced. And so I come from a little place called the Quad Cities. It's a group of towns that's on the Mississippi River. Half of them are on the Illinois side. Half of them are on the Iowa side. It's the Quad Cities. Quad Cities. Davenport, Iowa, Bettendorf, Iowa, Rock Island, Illinois, Moline, Illinois, and East Moline, Illinois. The Quad Cities. They don't count very well there. And then a lot of little surrounding towns around those. And I lived in Milan. My parents divorced. My mother and I moved into an apartment in Rock Island. All of these towns bordered. You could never tell when you were going from one town to the next. There wasn't any gap between towns. And Milan bordered Rock Island. And we moved in there. And we actually moved about 2 blocks down the road from my brother and his wife. And they had this adorable little house. It was absolutely gorgeous. It was such a little dollhouse. And it had, you walked in the front door and there was the living room and there was this tiny little sunroom off over here. You turn this way, there was a nice little dining area. And then there was a galley kitchen at the turn off of that. Go down a few steps and out the back door or on down to the basement. If you went straight back across the living room, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, they were right there. Tiny, tiny little house, but there was just the 2 of them. And they had a little dog and they decided to go away for the weekend. And they told me that they would pay me $20. And in 1979, 89 money, $20 was a lot, let me tell you. And so they said they'd give me $20 if I wanted to go to feed the dog. I had to take her out in the morning, take her out in the afternoon, and take the paper in when it came in the morning, and then put the mail in the house in the afternoon, in the evening. And on top of that, I was able to play my brother's stereo, which was really cool. It was actually a quadraphonic system back when that was really a cool thing. And they had a pool table in the basement, and I could go down there and play. And so I remember Saturday morning comes along, and I get up and I skip on down the road, and I take the dog out, and I put the mail, or I guess that would have been the newspaper in. I went downstairs, I sat at the pool table, and I'm shooting pool and just having a good time and playing records and being a 15-year-old kid. And I hear this banging sound upstairs, and it just terrified me. It was just a really loud bam. And so I run upstairs to see what's wrong. And the oven door is open in the galley kitchen. Okay, well, it's an older oven. Maybe the door broke or whatever. So I closed it. I went downstairs. I was down there for about, I don't know, maybe another 10, 15 minutes. And bam, I heard it again. Once again, the oven door was open. So I go back down to the basement, and I'm down there for another 10 or 15 minutes. And I hear another bang, a little bit different this time. I go upstairs. I walk through the kitchen into the little dining room area, turn this way. I'm headed to into the living room, and I look to the back of the house, and I noticed that the bedroom and the bathroom door were both closed. Now, I couldn't remember if they'd been closed before or not, but I thought, well, the wind must have blown them shut. I'll just leave them shut. Went back downstairs, 10 minutes, bam, same bam again. I come back up the stairs. This time the bedroom and the bathroom door are open. Now, the wind would not have blown them back open. They were latched. So now I'm spooked. But my brother had a practical joker friend, okay? And I thought, this is Gary. He's playing with me. But I wasn't 100% sure, so I went back downstairs. My brother was very meticulous with his pool table. I had to put everything away and he had a little thing that you ran over the green part of the table, and I had to put the cover on it, and I had to put the albums away, and I hear another bang, and I can hear voices, and now I am terrified, and I am flying up the stairs, and I just want to go home. And as I came through the kitchen and around that dining room, over in the far corner was the television set. And in 1979, remote controls were just not common. I think they existed, but I had never seen one. And I know my brother's TV didn't have one, but that TV turned itself off. I just did a right turn and went straight out the front door. I got back to the apartment. I told my mom I wasn't going back that night. I wasn't going back on Sunday. She could have the $20. She could play pool if she wanted. I was not ever entering that house alone again. And so she had to go down and feed the dog. And I got harassed. Oh, my goodness. I got teased by my brother and his wife for that. But here's the fun story, okay? My brother, all of my brothers were quite a bit older than me. There's kind of a fun story about that too, just to give you a laugh. I'll tell you in a minute. But so he was 18 years older than me, and my sister-in-law was 20 years older than me, and she had children that with her first husband that lived in Florida, and he died of cancer, and she got custody of the 3 girls. They came up to Illinois to live there. Now, this is a tiny little house, so they had to make a makeshift bedroom in the basement. I was teased about what happened that day and you know, being scaredy cat and all of that, but you know, none of those 3 girls would ever stay in that house alone. And they could not get moved out of there fast enough. So I wasn't the only one. I just was the only one dumb enough to talk about it. And that's always been the case with me. I'm dumb enough to talk about it. And then that, of course, allows people to make fun of me, but you know, whatever. But I wanted to tell you, I am the youngest of 5 children. My mom and dad had 3 sons, perfect, wonderful sons. The oldest was a hard worker. The middle one was a genius. The younger of the 3 was quite the athlete. Perfect family, wonderful sons. 7 years after the youngest boy is born, my mom and dad had a girl, my sister. Oh, well, you know, she was an oops, but she was a girl and they didn't have a girl, and that was wonderful. 5.5 years after that, my oldest brother is a senior in high school. My sister has started kindergarten, and the other two boys are like in junior high school. They had me. I was not an oops. I was an oh, hell no. And so I didn't really grow up with my brothers and sister. Well, kind of with my sister, but not with my brothers. So when I talk about them, I always think of them as uncles because they were all adults when I was born or when I grew up. But anyway, that was I think probably the next very strange thing that happened to me. Over time, there were other things. I got married. I moved into an old house in Taylor Ridge, Illinois, which is in southern Rock Island County. And it was, at one time, it was the Taylor Ridge post office. And it was in really bad shape when we moved in. We had to do a lot of work on it, and it just was always in bad shape. But we moved in, and at that time, I was pregnant with my second child. By the way, this is after my Bigfoot encounter that I shared with you the last time. And so in fact, this was like literally like 2 months after. We moved into this house in February, and like I said, I was pregnant with my second child, and it had one of those wonderful old clawfoot bathtubs, you know, that like was like a horse tank size. And I would go sit in that tub because back then I didn't know it was a bad thing to sit in hot water if you were pregnant. So I would just get, you know, curl up in that tub in hot water, and I'd soak. And my older son was laying on the bed sleeping, and I heard somebody call my name. And so I yelled, "What?" And nobody answered. And I thought, what is my husband doing? Does he not hear me? Does he not know I'm up here? He could walk up the stairs and, you know, talk to me. But I was, you know, just enjoying my bath. And pretty soon I hear somebody call my name again. "What?" I said, and yet nobody answered. And I thought, this is really getting irritating. One more time, I hear somebody call my name. "What?" I said. Nobody answered. So I climb out of the tub and I wrap myself in my towel. And as I'm walking past, right next to the bathroom door was, because this was an old house, and our bathroom was a converted bedroom, and it had a big long window. And as I was walking past the window, the person I thought who was calling me was my husband. But I was watching him pull into the garage in the backyard, at the back of the yard. He wasn't even home when I heard that. And so I have no idea who that was who was calling me. I honestly, to this day, I don't know. But I've always been told that you should not answer. And of course I did. I didn't know any better. That house was kind of a creepy house, but it wasn't the one that really bothered me the most. The one that bothered me the most was we moved down to the farm, the family farm, a few years after that. And we had 5 acres, and it was surrounded by the 200 acres of farm. And this house had been in the family. I think it was built in like the 1870s or something like that. So it had been in the family at that point for 110, 120 years. And it was just your typical old farmhouse. It was more kitchen than anything else on the main floor, and the bedrooms upstairs were all tiny. But the boys, the back half of the house was all kitchen, and above that was like sort of like an attic room. And that's where my son, who was 12 when this happened, would sit or sleep. That was his bedroom. And then going around the stairs to the front, and on the other side was my other son's bedroom. And then right off the stairs and across the hall was my bedroom. And my husband at the time, he worked on the Rock Island Arsenal Bridge. And I don't know what shift he was working, because it could have been, he worked the swing shift, so it could have been any shift, but I know he wasn't home that night. And I was in charge of our spring frolic that the PTA puts on, at the grade school every year. That I was in charge of that year. And I was on the phone with the president of the PTA, and we were going over, she just wanted an update. And so we're sitting there, we're talking, and it's nighttime. The kids are in bed. I'm trying to get things put together because I got to work in the morning or whatever. And I'm standing at the kitchen sink at the far back of the kitchen. And this is underneath my son's bedroom. Now, this is an old farmhouse, so it's all gravity-fed heat. There isn't really anything forced. There's no forced air. There's just a hole in the floor, and the heat rises up. And that's how, so anything that's being said in the kitchen, he can hear clearly in his bedroom. And I'm literally standing directly under that register, and I know that register is right by his bed. So I'm standing there and I'm doing dishes, and I hear him come down the stairs behind me, or come into the kitchen behind me. Every now and then he would generously come into the kitchen and dry dishes for me at the end of the night so I could get done faster. So I turned around. I've got, back in the old days, when the world was in black and white, we had cordless phones, but they were these big honking things, and they had these big long antennas that you had to pull out of them, and they were bulky and clunky, and so I was talking to Tammy, and I'm washing dishes, and my son comes up behind me, and I turn around to hand him the towel, and this little old woman with little round glasses dissolved right in front of me, 2 feet from me. She was there, and then she wasn't. And it was like a cloud dissipating. I don't know how. I wish I could. There's a better way to describe it, but she just was there, and then she wasn't. But it wasn't like a blink. It was slow. And I screamed into the phone, "Oh my God, Tammy, I've seen a ghost." And she's like, What are you talking about? I've seen a ghost, I said. And I throw down my towel, and I'm like, I gotta be upstairs. I gotta be with my kids. So I run through the kitchen and through the living room and up the stairs. And I get up to the top of the stairs, and my boy's over here. And I got a boy over there. And I'm like, no, I'm just going to sit in the bedroom and collect myself. And I run across the bedroom. I hang up the phone. I sit down on the bed, and the bed sat up. I took that phone and I whipped it right at that, and I hit my 8-year-old son right in the forehead. He had been spooked by something and crawled into my bed, and I had sat down on him, and of course he sat up in protest, and I hit him in the forehead with the phone. That was probably the biggest thing at our house, was the night that Grandma came. And we always assumed it was Grandma for a lot of reasons. I did see a picture of her later. I eventually came across a picture of my husband's grandmother, and it was the same woman. There was no doubt in my mind. If it wasn't her, it was her sister. I know that she died. The grandma died in the house. I know the grandfather died in the house. I know the uncle died in the house. There were a lot of people who, back in the day, that's just what, laid in bed and died. I know that she had some serious emotional trauma with the uncle, her son, her younger son, he was a cruel man. And he was a bitter man because he had been born with type A diabetes. And he was always, always angry. He never married. He lived there at home his whole life. And he was just not a likable person. And he had a German Shepherd that he kind of trained to be mean. And the front half of the farmhouse, on one side was the living room, and on the other side was a bedroom that I actually converted at different times to our TV room. And then at one point it was my office when I was working from home. And, but that was her bedroom. And when she got old and sick, she would call for Donald to bring her a drink or something. And if he got irritated with her, instead of bringing her a drink, he'd sick the dog on the door. And she was terrified of that door. And that door, even when we lived there, had big, long scratch marks where the dog would scratch the door. And she was just terrified of that dog. I think I said the door, but she's terrified of the dog. And so she had a lot of trauma leading up to her death. And so I could see why she would have haunted that house. I will say this, though. One of the first things I noticed when we moved in is we had the washer and dryer was down in the cellar. And so I would take the laundry down in the morning, and I would do a load of laundry, and I'd go down at night and I would take it, put it in the dryer when I got home from work. And then when it was done, I'd bring it upstairs and I'd sit in the living room and fold it. And this was a daily routine. When you got, 2 kids, 4 people, that's got to be your daily routine, and you'll never keep up with it. So some nights I'd get tired. Some nights I'd just be too tired to fold the laundry, and I'd leave the basket sitting on the couch, and I'd think, oh, I'll fold it in the morning. Never had to fold it the next morning. It was always folded for me. Always. She always folded my laundry for me. And there was what I can remember. There were times when we would be sitting in the living room, and every light in the house would just start flashing on and off and on and off and on and off. And I mean, the lamps in the living room would be going off and on, and the overhead light would be going off and on opposite of that. And in the TV room, things would be going off and on back in the kitchen. I mean, every light in the house would just be flashing like strobe lights. And I just, one time I got really tired of it, and I said, stop. And it, just like that, it stopped. All the lights went on and stayed on. My older son was sitting in his bedroom playing, and he would have been about 10 or 11 at the time. He was a big fan of Transformers. He had all of them that I could afford. I don't think we ever had Optimus Prime, but most of them we had. And he was sitting in his bedroom playing. And his bedroom was a long room because it was like I said, it was the attic over the kitchen. And at one end was a chest of drawers. And on top of that was a plastic globe that I had bought for him. And he had put his hat on top of the globe, and he's sitting at the opposite end of the room. I'm going to say that room was probably 14, maybe 20 feet long. I mean, it wasn't like a massive hall, but it was a wide room. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, that globe launched itself in the air and flung itself at his head. And he just dodged just in time to avoid being hit by it. And then there was the night, like I said, the room where that was Grandma's bedroom. I had converted that to a TV room, and there were all of the windows of the house were real, they were almost floor to ceiling. They were huge, long windows. And of course, all the ceilings were pretty high. And so there were 2 windows on the north side of the house and one on the west side. And we had mini blinds in those windows. And I realized I was watching TV, and I realized it had gotten dark. And so the kids were upstairs in their rooms. Again, I think my husband must have been working a shift. And I got up to turn all of the blinds. I didn't have to drop them or anything like that. I just turned the wand, and they went from like this to this. And I went to sit back down after I got the third one done. And as I was sitting down, all 3 blinds went from this to this at the same time. I said, okay, Grandma, you can watch TV if you want. I'm going to go to bed. I got up and I went upstairs. I was done. I didn't want to be in there anymore. And so that was probably the craziest house I ever lived. It was when we moved in. It was probably over 100 years old when we moved in, and we lived there for 20 years. Now, I'll tell you something interesting that happened on that farm. I may have shared this before, but I'm going to share it again because this has always shocked me. I didn't always know about Dogman. I don't think most of us did. And when I first thought, I just could not wrap my mind around the concept of some werewolf creature wandering around in the woods. And so it took me a long time to accept the concept of Dogman. And I even wound up on Bray Road by accident one time, which is another story. But and I still, at the time, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a Dogman. But on that farm, our house, you came up the driveway and there was a big barn here. There was a barn off to the side here. The driveway turned and it went to our house, and there was 2 smaller barns and a shed over behind the house. And then there was the chicken coops. And the barn, as you were driving up the drive that was off to the side, well, it burned down eventually. It actually burned down before I even moved there. But way back in the late 1950s, the farmers in that area were having problems with something killing their livestock. And they didn't quite know what it was. It didn't seem like it was coyotes. But at the same time, it looked kind of like coyote damage. Wolves were not. I think wolves have been reintroduced to Illinois, but certainly they weren't there in the 1950s. Bears were not an issue. They couldn't figure out what was killing their livestock. And one night, a group of farmers, probably about 5 or 6 men, got together and they decided that they were going to go hunt this thing down. And they got on the track of something and they chased it up what is the hollow is called Turkey Hollow. And they chased it up Turkey Hollow and they cornered it in that barn, the one that burned down, all the way in the back. And when they saw what it was, they didn't kill it. They all very quietly backed away and they went home and they never hunted again. Now, I know this story because when I had my Bigfoot encounter, which was down on Big Island in Milan, I got made fun of a lot for that. I think I've talked about that quite a bit. It's really hard to this day for me to talk about that because of all the teasing that I endured for that. But my mother-in-law, who was not one of my favorite people, we were never what you would call best friends. She actually, she pulled me aside and she said, "I believe you." Not what I expected. And the reason that she believed me was because she told me that story that I just told you. And I said, "So there was a Bigfoot?" And she says, No, it wasn't a Bigfoot. That much I do know. They wouldn't talk about it, but it wasn't a Bigfoot. Well, it took me a lot of years to put 2 and 2 together to figure out, I think they cornered the Dogman in that barn. And so that's always been kind of a sort. I wish that barn was still there. It's not. But yeah, I always thought that was really interesting. I actually, as I was telling you before we started recording, that I'm headed to the LBL this weekend. And I'm going there with a group of friends, and it's, it's not any big expedition or anything. We're just going to spend the weekend there, and it's a nice meet and greet type thing for one of the groups I belong to. And I'm excited about where I'm going because we're going to go to Colson Hollow. And a couple of years ago when I was up there at that same hollow, we were driving down, my husband was driving the car, and I'm looking out and I saw something in the woods that I'm not quite sure what it was. I've convinced myself that it wasn't a Dogman. But I can tell you that whatever it was as black as night. I mean, it was almost like it was absorbing light. It wasn't just black, it was sucking the light into it. And it was sitting there, and when I saw it, it moved sideways. I remember it had a profile that reminded me hysterically of the Tasmanian devil. And then it kind of went a few steps alongside of us, and then it went straight up the hill. I don't know. For all I know, it could have been a play on shadow and light. I've never seen anything that dark. I've never seen a shadow that dark. That shadow looked like it was sucking the light in. And then last year, same place, Colson Hollow again, I was there with another group of friends, and I had parked my vehicle. Cameron Buckner from Dixie Cryptid was there, and facing my vehicle was here in the middle. Cameron Buckner from Dixie Cryptid was there, and Roger Williams and his wife Heather from Squatch and Hollow were here, and I was in my SUV, sleeping in my SUV. I don't sleep on the ground. I don't bring tents. If I can't sleep in my vehicle or in a camper, I ain't going. And in the middle of the night, I hear somebody walking around my vehicle. Now, I know that several had gone out. They were, they decided to go out and do some calls and do some research. I'm a lazy old bag. I stayed home in the truck, and so I'm laying there, and I hear somebody walking around my vehicle, and I thought, oh, they must be back, and somebody's sneaking off to relieve himself in the woods, which I thought was kind of odd because the direction the person came from was actually the direction of the bathrooms. And I had this kind of, one of those little naughty feelings when I thought, oh, you know what I should do? I should wait till he gets right in front of the vehicle and turn on the light. That'll show him. That'll teach him to pee by my vehicle. And then I thought, no, I would be embarrassed if somebody did that to me, so I'm not going to do that. And I went back to sleep. The next morning, Roger and Heather said that there was something walking around all of our vehicles, and they didn't think it was a person. I'm like, why didn't I turn on the light? I could have turned on the light and I could have seen what it was, but it's easy to say that in hindsight. To actually do that when you think that might be what it is, it takes a little more bravery, I think. So, but ever since I had my sighting, and I can't call it a sighting, my encounter began in 1984, in winter of 1984, and then the second part of that was in July of 85. And I began to be teased about it because I foolishly went around telling people. I have lived in this strange world of, I need to see another one to prove that I'm not crazy. And seeing another one terrifies me. I've been afraid of the dark since I was a little kid, but I'll go out in the woods in the middle of the night by myself and walk around because I need to see another one. I need to. It's not even a desire. It is an absolute obsession. I need to see one more. It's been 40 years. I need to see one more. I need to know I'm not crazy. Because, when you see one, that's what you got. You either have to accept that you've lost your mind or go out in the woods and prove it. And so, yeah, I wish I had turned the light on that night. I wish I had turned the headlights on and I could have seen what was in the woods there. So we're going this weekend, and fingers crossed.
But then it might have been a Marvin Groves situation. I'm sure you've heard.
Oh my gosh, yes. Marvin lives just down the road from me.
I've been asked, what do you think? I don't know what they were, because it wasn't just, it's a Bigfoot, it's a Dogman. The beings he described, not only were there more than one in just quantity, but there was also different types. And the being he described was like, I don't know. I wouldn't even, it wasn't like, it's a werewolf. No, it was a beast. It was just a beast.
I think I personally think that the Beast of LBL, I don't think it is a Dogman. I think the Beast of LBL is a Gugwe. I mean, I think there are Dogway. I think there are Dogmen there, but I think that the scary one, and I'm not saying Dogmen aren't scary because I don't think there's anything good in a Dogman. I think they're about as malevolent as a creature can be. But when you hear them describe the size of these, it sounds more like a Gugwe to me. And so, I don't want to run into a Gugwe, not unless my car is going 60 miles an hour in the other direction and I'm securely inside of it. But we were in the south. Colson Hollow is south. The way, I don't know if you're familiar with how the LBL works, but it's, you've got the two rivers that come down to form the two lakes, Barkley Lake and Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake. I don't know which is one on which side. And the LBL, of course, is that land in between. Most of it, I think, is up in Kentucky, but quite a bit of it does go down into Tennessee. And halfway up is, I think it's 68, I think the highway is 68, bisects it. It crosses both bridges. There's a bridge crossing both lakes. And then I can never remember the trace runs up the spine of the LBL, right up the middle. And all these little roads run off of the trace. There's a belief that from this, roughly that highway up is pretty much Dogman territory. And then from pretty much that highway down is pretty much Bigfoot territory. Now, if I saw a Dogman, I saw it in Bigfoot territory, but I wouldn't be the only one. Tim Coonbo Baker says he saw one in Bigfoot territory too. So when I go up there, I guess my attitude is, I'll go. I don't know if you're familiar. Of course you are. Everybody's familiar with the story of the LBL. That took place way up at the north end. And I will be. Bay. Yes, thank you. Demumbers Bay. And I will be going to Demumbers Bay on Saturday. But I wouldn't camp in Demumbers Bay. I also, interestingly, Martin Groves' experience. In fact, Martin, by the way, was at the LBL with us when the thing walked around. He was there that weekend. He and his group didn't show up until the night after that happened, but they were there that weekend. I'm sure they heard the buzz as we were all talking about what was walking around our vehicles last night. But Martin's experience happened, of course, down on the Devil's Backbone, which is actually even further south. So I don't know why I think I'm so much more secure in Colson Hollow, because he saw multiple creatures even further. Probably in Tennessee, because Martin lives just down the road from me, and we're definitely in Tennessee here. So his license was probably for Tennessee to hunt there. Interestingly, last year when I was there, one of the things that was, I don't remember who it was. When I'm there, I'm usually brought there for one reason. People want to hear my stories. They like to hear me tell a good, scary story, whether it's a ghost story or one of my real life encounters or, bloody bones or whatever. And I had been doing that all night long. And I was a little tired at that point. And I did plan on, because I live close enough to the LBL that I can, if I don't want to camp overnight, I could just drive back to the house and sleep in my own bed and then go back the next day. And that's what I intended to do that night. And so I was already tired. I was, feeling this strain of having been there and slept in my vehicle the night before. And I really wasn't paying too much attention at first. And I don't remember who told this story. But apparently a group had gone down to the Devil's Backbone because they wanted to explore where Martin had had his experience. And they got down there, and the two women stayed in the truck. But the two guys, it was two couples that went down. The two guys got out and walked down to the creek. And the roads, in the LBL, the trace is your basic 2-lane highway, but some of those other roads aren't much more than dirt paths. And I couldn't tell you what kind of a road they were on, because once you get down on the Devil's Backbone, they even split off. I mean, it looks like little creeks, fingers of creeks, and it's really roads. But anyway, they walked down to this creek, and the wives stayed up in the car. And when they got back, and they'd been gone for about an hour, so the wives said, "There's a red truck over there." They showed up at about sunset. It was a man and a woman and their kid. They got out. They walked away. They haven't come back yet. Now, the two guys said they felt like something was maybe pacing them back up. If it was pacing them, it was probably a Bigfoot. I don't think Dogman will pace you. I think Bigfoot do that. It's more of a primate thing. And so they were concerned that these guys were down there, and they waited and they waited and they waited, and that couple never came back out. Well, I kind of got the tail end of the story, and I was leaving. I jumped in my vehicle. I am headed to Tennessee anyway, so I just drove down that way. And I kind of drove down the road. I didn't see the vehicle. But who knows? It could have been a million side roads that they pulled off on too. So I went on home, and when I came back the next day, apparently there had been a search and rescue team out looking for this couple. And I did hear eventually that they found them. But the rest of that weekend, it was kind of, you didn't ask and they didn't say. Well, you could ask all you want, but they can be super friendly and open at the LBL about that kind of thing. And then the next person comes along and they'll just, clamp their mouth down. And nope, we're not going to talk to you about this. So, but I did hear eventually that, I'm sorry, I've got this hair that's like tickling my nose. I keep thinking I'm fighting it and it just won't go away. But, so I did hear eventually, though, that family was found, that everything was okay. A few years ago, I'm sure everybody knows about the big tornado. It started in Arkansas, it went across Tennessee, southern Missouri, up into Kentucky. I mean, this thing stayed on the ground forever. And it took out quite a few towns. I mean, we would drive through some of the towns, and I mean, just one whole half of the town would be flat. One of the towns that hit was Bowling Green, which is just up the road from here. Anyway, a lot of people, being poor and having no insurance, grabbed tents and went to the LBL and just kind of lived in tent cities there. Well, not even tent cities, just by themselves in tents. And I have heard many, many, many accounts from various people who've been there who've found torn up tents in the LBL. Just the tent looks like something from behind just ripped it open and everything's left there, but there's no people.
Oh,
I know. So it's a creepy place.
That's my thing. Is yeah, you go tent there, all of a sudden, it's just, I'm not worried about, I'm worried about something ripping me out of my tent.
Yeah, I actually even fear about being ripped out of my vehicle. But if I've got the key in the ignition and I'm close, I feel a little more secure, So, but I'm a big scaredy cat. I would never sleep in a tent. Not in the LBL.
As I'm looking at the map, so 3 years ago, I went to Nashville, and I remember I had to do something in Kentucky. I don't remember what exactly it was, because I did two separate things there. And I remember at some point during that, I think it was the first time I went, I drove on the bridge heading to Nashville. So for those out there who aren't familiar with the geography, if you're heading east towards Nashville, the LBL would be to your left. But if you just go by, I don't know what that main interstate highway is.
24.
What's more of a freeway? What is
24? 24? Were you on 24?
I think so. Yeah, because it's like if you look to your left, there's LBL, and then to your right, there's the southern side. Yeah, and then you're going over the river.
Yeah, that's beautiful. 68.
Gorgeous, really gorgeous. But I remember I had the thought like, oh my gosh, like there's ground zero right there.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah. I have a nephew who lives in Southern Illinois, and for years he came down to the LBL and hunted. deer hunted every season. And when I tried to ask him about it, he just laughed. He says, "There's nothing scary there. I've been there a million times." And he hunts the north end. So
a bunch of people they don't have any experiences. Everything's honky dory with them. And then you have people who go down there and they have the worst experience of their life, or they become a statistic and you don't ever hear from them again.
Right. There was
I don't know.
There was actually a really interesting story of a young man who was coming up on, I think he was started maybe somewhere in Louisiana or Mississippi, and he was going north on his, he was going cross country on his 10 speed or 18 speed or whatever they are these days. And he had contacted his family and said, "I'm going to camp here. This is where I'm at. And I'll call you tomorrow and let you know when I'm back on the road." And they never got another phone call from him. They never found anything, any evidence whatsoever. The last they heard was that he was camped at the LBL. So, and of course, everybody talks about the massacre that happened at Mumbers Bay, but there's that bridge that bisects the LBL is apparently there was a person who worked there, and he was, I don't know what he was. I'm assuming he was doing something for the, the Department of Natural Resources. I don't know. But he was coming up and trolling along the bank on a boat, not even on the bank. He was out towards the middle. And he saw that there was a tent, sort of not under the bridge, but close to it on the bank. And he could see a Dogman coming. And he tried to alert the people that were sitting there, run, run. And of course what's it? And he literally sat there and watched those people become dinner. So
that's the story that DA told me.
Yeah.
I don't know if he described it as a Dogman. I think he said it was a Gugwe, but either way, it was like a young couple, and it came up from behind him, and he's like trying to wave at them, from the boat, and they're like,
"What do you want?"
And all of a sudden they just
And that was
and
it.
He's got a front row seat to a gore fest.
Yeah. And I've seen that guy interviewed a few times, and I mean, you can tell this guy is scarred. That's not the kind of story that you could tell with a straight face. I mean, you can tell calmly if it's not true. And he shakes, and you can tell this guy suffered watching that. And I can't even imagine what they suffered. That's as much as I do this, and as much as I'm crippled up and I'm old, and getting out in the woods has really become quite an ordeal for me in recent years. My biggest fear is to be eaten. So I still do it. But every time I go out there, I think I'm going to be dinner one of these days. Why do I do this? So where I live, I'm in a stretch that is considered a hot zone, but I'm just south of it. And I don't know if you'd heard about the, darn it, of course I didn't. All of my notes are on this little device here, and I didn't plug it in, and I don't have another outlet. But there was what is it? It's a county up in Kentucky that's not too far from me. And they had a farm where they had miniature horses, and they had goats and sheep, and it was sort of like a little kit farm. And they had livestock on it, but it wasn't a really big farm. And something came on there, and it killed the livestock. And the DNR came, and they did they researched it, and they told them, well, this was clearly a human attack. I mean, these are all knife cuts. But the sheriff showed up, and he looks and he says, "Those aren't knife cuts. There's no human footprints anywhere, but there's this great big pad here. It looks like a dog's footprint. It is, like massive. And these are all jagged. these aren't cuts from anything human or metal. These are rips in the skin of these animals. Well, so of course the sheriff goes on the news, and you can find this. There are news clips, and I can even send you a couple, where the sheriff is like, yeah, no, that's not a human thing. And the DNR is like, yeah, no, that's human attacks. It's like the DNR wanted to shut this down right now, and the sheriff wasn't going to let him. And as far as I know, they still are. I don't know that they've ever settled that. And of course, that was right around the same time as the Corey.
Oh, yeah.
Corey
The
Godsey
13-year-old boy.
case. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
a different part of the state, but still, it's all right around the same time. So people were a little spooked anyway. I don't talk much about the Corey Godsey case anymore because his family has come out and said, let it die. And in respect to them, I let it die. And of course, that was also the same time as the Brenda, the school teacher, retired school teacher in North Carolina, South Carolina.
The one that got eaten?
Yeah, she was found in a ditch, just tore to pieces, and they said it was a pack of wild dogs. So the cops hunted down every wild dog in the area. They put them all to death, and the DNA on that those dogs, none of them matched the DNA found on her body.
Shocker.
Yeah, so they like to shut it down, and I don't understand why. I don't see the purpose of that. They're not, when our government does weird things, you always think, okay, why am I looking over here? What magic trick are they pulling over there? But that's not what this feels like, and I don't get it.
Probably, I think because if they even alluded to something more, it could cause panic. But I've said this many times, more importantly, they have to maintain complete trust in a governing body. If you do anything that would cause distrust, I mean, it just erupts in chaos, because then people start asking questions. Well, if you lied to us about this, what else are you lying to us about? And then it's just, you have to maintain control over, your body. And unfortunately, that means lies, manipulation. You have to maintain a narrative. You have, no matter what, and that's just, it is what it is.
Yeah. It's not right, though.
Oh, no, this isn't, this is complete moral corruption, but there's obviously, you see some of these cases where it's like the evidence that something more than what they're saying is just glaringly obvious, but there's like, yeah, no, it was this thing. Like, okay, all right, I get it. I understand. It's the same reason, why I don't think we'll ever have quote unquote disclosure of like Bigfoot or disclosure of this. It's like, you'd have so many people trying to go in there and hunt and kill, and then people wouldn't go camping. So you'd have massive revenue loss from like, state forest, national, it would just be chaos. And then of course, distrust. You can't ever have that. So, I would imagine, and I don't know this for sure, this is just a theory, but I would imagine that they probably have several hoax and disinformation campaigns, of all kinds, from people like dressing in suits to, injecting like fake images and videos to try and like really desensitize people to the idea that it might be real. Or I'm sorry, to get them to believe that it's all fake, that it's a honey, or like they'll show an eyewitness and he's like, there's a Bigfoot in my pancakes. So people laugh and go, that guy's an idiot, Bigfoot, right? There's a whole psychological thing that they want to downplay it, Yeah, that they don't. To me, there's something more nefarious underneath all that, and I'm like, why though? Like, what about it is so? Because you hear many accounts, and not all of them are nefarious. There's many that are either neutral or some that are like, amazing that you hear, but it's like, what? I don't know. So I'm like you. I don't.
My account, my own account, it was not nefarious. I was afraid because it was an unknown factor. But when I look back at what happened, I kind of laugh at myself now. I wish I could truly laugh at myself, but I can't. I'm not kidding. I'm not going to lie. I still have fear when I remember it. But I often wonder why, because it didn't do anything to ever instill that fear in me, other than the fact that it was huge and it was way too close. And so, I mean, there are tons of encounters like mine that you wouldn't call a negative encounter. They're just, yeah. But then again, I can't remember the name of the man, but he was down in Georgia. He owned some vacation property. He'd gone there for the weekend to do some work. He'd done his work, got on his ATV, headed down in the woods. He didn't come home. They finally went down looking for him. They found the ATV sitting right in the middle of the path. And it was just like something had lifted him up off of it. And, so not all of them are negative or positive or neutral either.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I want to say one of the things that's irked me is you have some of these stories and accounts from Native Americans, particularly, I don't know the tribe, but in Northern California, there's an area where they would refer to them as mountain devils because they would invade the village at night and abduct the women and children and eat them.
Yeah.
And that's just, there's so many similarities like that. In fact, when I worked at the shop, we had several different natives that would come in, and I would ask them, I'm like, hey, I know this is really unconventional, but I'm like, what do you guys think about Bigfoot? And just like kind of those questions, they always like, oh yeah, to them it was so matter of fact. They would just immediately start telling me stories, and of course they're condensed because they're there to buy product and not talk about that. But to them it was it was a matter of oh yeah, seeing bears, and just knowing that they're there. And I remember one guy, he told me they had their camper beat on, and there's just a myriad of other things that they'd experienced. But there's there's just certain places in the woods that we respect as theirs, we don't go to it. I haven't encountered it in all the research I've done. I haven't encountered a single tribe that were it doesn't exist. It's just all fake. Right. They're yeah, no, every single thing I've looked at, they're always, we respect this certain area. We don't go to it. We try to there's either war or peace with them. Some tribes have trade with them. And unfortunately some tribes have war with them. From what I've seen and read is that they revere these beings as a people, these beings are a tribe, a separate tribe that they're not referred to as animals. It definitely makes me hesitant to be in certain places in the woods, at least not prepared, not armed. But then again, you hear there's so many stories of hunters, and these guys are not just they're not just armed, but they're also skilled. They know what they're doing. They're trackers. They've been in their life their whole way, and they just vanish.
No, I agree. And I actually have a belief that sometimes when a hunter goes missing, I think that's the one that actually pulled the trigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was a story years ago I heard about, he was a guide, and his job was to take people out into the woods to hunt. His only purpose was to guide them and to set up camp and things like that. And this was in Colorado, and he'd taken a man out into the woods and had set him up apparently at the one end of a meadow, and he'd gone way down to the other end. And he heard the man screaming and shooting, and he thought, well, this can't be a deer. That can't be, well, I'm sure it wasn't even a deer at that point. It's probably elk or something. But anyway, he thought, this is weird. So he goes running down to the other end. And as he's running towards the man, he sees the man coming towards him, and he's being chased. And right before his eyes, he saw this man who had turned and fired on this thing a couple of times. This reached the man, grabbed his head, and twisted it off. And, and he went to the, I guess, the game wardens or whatever, and turned it in. And the man wound up being tried, I think, for murder. And I don't know if he was found guilty or whatever, but they accused him of being right. You got to have a scapegoat. You can't let somebody die and have a body without having. And I just thought, what human being do you know could twist off a head? That's a lot of strength right there. And I don't know, honestly, I'm going to tell you on that one, I can't remember the source of that one. I don't want you to hold me to my facts on that story. I'm just telling you what I remember, and that's been probably 15 years ago I heard that one. Unfortunately, at my age, I have decades and decades of stories that I've heard, but I don't always file them away in the right place. I was thinking, when you said about mountain devils, you've heard of wood devils up in Vermont and hide behinds. And
No.
yeah, there are a couple of kind of cool. Hide behind is a very, very thin, apparently Bigfoot type creature that hides behind the trees. And these are all stories that come from the lumberjacks in those areas that, when you got a line of lumberjacks coming back to camp, the last one doesn't make it back. It's because the hide behind got him or the wood devil got him. And I think those are fascinating stories. But I was going to tell you something that what I do, of course, is I collect stories based on folklore. I don't just want to hear about an encounter. I want to find out, for instance, the Blue Man in Missouri. I don't want to just know that somebody's seeing something. I want to know all the way back to the origin of that. And a really good example of that is the Loveland frogs, which I know you're familiar with. But most people start that in 1955 with the traveling salesman who happened to go up on the bridge, and he sees these short beings, and one of them draws out a wand, and sparks come out of the wand, and he backs away, and he gets away just in the nick of time. And then of course that goes to 1973 when the cop is crossing the bridge, and he sees what I don't know what he saw, but I know that a second cop comes along and sees it laying there, and he shoots it, and he puts it in the trunk of his car, shows it to the first cop. They agree that that's the same thing. Of course, most people end it right there. They say that's it because the Loveland frog had to be the giant iguana that these two cops identified. Of course, that doesn't explain the dozens of other encounters that, since then, like how many people are turning loose their oversized iguanas in the Miami River, right? But the thing that most people don't realize is that way, way back when the French trappers, when that was French territory, they were coming back out of those woods with the story of a river demon, as told to them by the Miami Indians, that looked like about a 3-foot tall frog that walked on two legs. Now, that was way before 1955. That was before the United States was a country. In fact, that was, like I said, back when the French had it as a territory. And that's the same. Also, if you go down, the Miami River feeds into the Ohio River. You go down the Ohio River a little farther to Kentucky. And I don't remember the name of the town, but there's another town that has an almost identical legend of these frog people. And of course, that's all Miami territory. So it's... I always, always, always try to find the Native American origins of a story, because so many of the folklore stories that I hear that are told by the Europeans who came here, they start with, well, there was the circus train and it was headed across the town, and then something happened and it jumped the tracks, and there was all these crazy animals on there. The only one that they didn't catch happened to be that two-legged one that looked like a big old gorilla. All the rest of them they caught. That one went out there, it made it, and now there's just tons of them in this area. Well, that's a story that you hear with every stinking folklore. But if you dig a little deeper, you're going to find the Native Americans have been telling that long before the Europeans ever got here. And that's what fascinates me. That's what drives me to keep digging for all these stories. And that I'm surrounded by books of stories of creatures and phenomena and spooky places. And I have one that I'm really particularly fond of. Are you familiar with Pino Turola? He is probably most famous for, you know what the Bimini Road is, right?
Yeah, is that road in the Bahamas? It's supposed to be like, yeah.
It's basically cut stones that's laying on the. Well, he's most famous for having found the Bimini Road. he was the diver that actually first discovered it. But he was sort of like an Indiana Jones, real life Indiana Jones character. He went all over the world, and he was always looking for, I don't think it was archaeology that fascinated him. I think he was just looking for treasure. And he spent quite a bit of time in South America. And one of the stories that he tells in his book that he wrote is of a creature there that apparently lives in the caves. And it is very much like our North American Bigfoot. And it is called, sure, I don't remember. But I love those stuff because you get into those books and you read them, and then you start looking at the folklore of the people that were there when the Europeans showed up, and you realize this isn't just a story to keep the kids out of the woods. Right now I'm working on a story called about Devil's Swamp in Louisiana. And one of the stories there are about the Letitia and the Lutins, which the Cajuns and the French say are the souls of small children who died before they were baptized, and now they're stuck in purgatory, and now they live in the swamp, and they do tricks, like they'll turn over your boat, or they'll cause a storm to come in and flood you out, and they're nefarious little bad children, but they're trapped on Earth for all eternity because they didn't get baptized before they died. And that's all fine and good. Great story, right? The Native Americans have a better story. They say that those are the children that have wandered off into the swamp, and rather than being eaten by alligators or whatever, they were raised by alligators and became some type of an amphibious hybrid of the two. And their stories go back hundreds of years before ours, and our stories go back to the 1700s. So I think that's fascinating. I think in the 1500s, because 1492 is when Columbus came over. In the 1500s, the Spanish kind of came along the Florida coast and across Texas and California. In the 1600s, the North was the Dutch and the English, and then I think the French came and took some of what Spain had in the South. But from, of course, I know I talked about him before, Thomas Nuttall, who was an English naturalist who came to the United States. He traveled all across the Ohio River Valley, and that was all former French territory. So anything, I mean, you really can't go back any farther, in all honesty, before 1500, but most of it is 1600, and then 1700. And I want to say that the Cahokia Mounds, which is a huge civilization outside of St. Louis, I think it was actually still quite active, almost up to maybe 1300. So there was a lot going on here that was so not European centric, and still going on here at that time. So yeah, we weren't making big colonies because they had big colonies out there. They were, that was a huge civilization. So
we haven't, everything west of the Mississippi is in its infancy. I mean, what we're talking, like the having a brain fart here, the Louisiana Purchase since like the early 1800s. Right. I mean, that we're 200 years. And so I say that because 200 years isn't a lot of time to develop all of this land. I mean, sure, you have metropolises, you have towns, of course, but there's a lot of undeveloped, untouched wilderness and desert and mountains and just regions that humans still haven't even seen between, the West Coast and Mississippi. And that's a lot of land.
Yeah.
So it's like, when people are like, there ain't nothing out there in the woods. I've been there. Really? I mean, you realize there's millions of acres of wilderness.
Even, let's just pretend that it's all been explored. Tell me somebody who's been on every ounce of 100 square acres at the same time, because this can be happening over here and you're over here. Yeah, maybe you were over here, but you're not there now. So, and unless it's something like New York City where you can't get away from people, even if it has been explored, it's not heavily populated. And a creature that is crafty and wants to stay hidden shouldn't have a hard time doing it. I have seen arguments against that. They have radar type stuff now that can detect I don't know, a pregnant lady beetle on a tree, setting up house at sunup. But I think that when they say, so how could we possibly have overlooked these things? Because I think the difference is a pregnant lady beetle setting up house on a tree at sunup isn't all that smart. And I think these creatures are incredibly intelligent.
Well, then you look at the vast amount of wilderness Canada has. There, I don't want to say that they're underdeveloped, but in terms of overall space, like square miles and like developed land and undeveloped land, I'm like, you look, it's like the entire top half of Canada is pine forest. Maybe not pine forest, but it's wilderness, and that's a lot of miles, a lot of cold, barren wilderness.
Alaska, our biggest state, and one of our least populated. It goes on for miles,
and you hear some wild stories, and not just of the Kushtaka, but I've the handful of stories I've heard, it's hairy.
I like getting DA. Speaking of DA, I like getting him started on Chatham, Alaska. Chatham, is that what it's called?
Oh yeah.
I love getting him.
He
loves to talk about that, and I love getting him started on it because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's a wild story. I remember, I think I talked about that maybe like a year and a half ago, but it's still in my reserve enough where I kind of remember the gist of it, but there really wasn't a concrete, like, okay, like it was for sure these things that drove people out. But, interestingly, a lot of the natives were like, yeah, we told you so.
Yeah.
So, what he wants to say.
Yeah.
And I think there's some other like weird supernatural stuff that happened there, like kind of like curse territory. But again, I'm kind of fuzzy on that, but just weird stuff that happened. It's kind of really makes you reevaluate, not on just say going into the outdoors, but like, when you're going off into like not just like the woods, but the wilderness, like you just like really make sure you're very aware of your surroundings as best you can be,
One of the hardest things I have ever listened to is the audio tape from when Timothy Treadwell, the Grizzly man, his last moments. His thing was he wanted to be up close and personal with the grizzly bears in Alaska, and he and his girlfriend had stayed later than they were supposed to. They'd sent their plane away and said come back in another month. And when the plane came back, they found that they had both been attacked and killed by grizzly. Interestingly, there was a tape going, and you hear their death. Not hers, you hear his, and it is gruesome. And I don't recommend anybody hear it because, man, I can't get it out of my head. I'm hearing it in my head right now. But if you're going to go out in the woods and play with these things, maybe you should listen to it, because it'll put the fear of God in you. I mean, it makes you think, boy, one wrong move and I could be in that man's shoes.
There's a movie that came out in 2015, starred Leonardo DiCaprio, and I don't remember the
Revenant.
character he played. Thank you, The Revenant. Yeah.
Yes.
And that scene where he's attacked by a grizzly bear it's been said as it is the most realistic bear attack. And I would imagine that the tape is probably like that's really similar, where he was attacked and it kind of just started eating on him. And I would imagine he's probably screaming in agony the whole time while it's slowly killing him.
It's awful.
You're not going to fight off a grizzly. I mean, come on, like it's just going to eat you, and you just gotta. And unfortunately, you don't lose consciousness for quite a while, so you
have to deal with it. And that, I think, if you're going to go out in the woods and you're really going to play with these things, it's the only time I would tell somebody you might want to listen to that first, because you need to know what you might be getting yourself into. And I get a lot of, I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, Miss Neoma, you are so foolish. Don't you know that these Bigfoot, they're the keepers of the woods. They're out there to protect you. They're not going to harm you. Why are you being this way about them? They're going to protect you. I get that people feel that way, and I'm glad for them. I'm going to say that probably most of those people are in the north, because down here they're not that friendly. All of the, like, I don't know, there's just a lot of negative stories down here, and I'm not taking chances. Just because somebody else says, well, they're my buddy, I'm not going to expect them to be mine.
I would tell those people to listen to the myriad of accounts where people have really terrifying experiences, or just, where these beings seem extremely nefarious.
Listen to Martin Groves.
I remember there was one that was sent to me. Yeah. There's one that was sent to me a while back. It's actually my book, where these two gentlemen get access to hunt this this section of land in I think it's Florida, and at some point during their little adventure, these things are like beating on their hunting camp. I mean, like not just like pounding, but I mean like denting and trying to break in. I mean, they're physical damage. I don't know if there's like sects of these things. And each sect or tribe has like their own, I don't know. I guess if you look at it like tribes, maybe they really do kind of have their own tribes, and some are like really violent and mean, and some aren't.
To reduce them to the level of dogs, and I don't mean to do so, but a very good example is I've never met a friendlier, more sweet-natured dog than a Havanese. They're not exactly pretty dogs, I don't think, but they are. I mean, I've watched my grandkids drag the Havanese all over the floor at their house when they were children. I wouldn't necessarily tell them that's a good idea to do with a Doberman pinscher. It's like I think that just like there are different breeds of humans, then there are different breeds of animals. There are probably different breeds of these, and some of them might be docile and friendly and intelligent, and some not so much. I owned a boxer once that I wanted to just strangle. He was the dumbest dog I ever saw in my life, So I think that to assume that they're all the same is a huge mistake. I would not do that.
It always made me laugh every time I was editing it. We were like, yeah, my ex-husband, you know that kind of dog you get really likable, but just dumb. Can't train him, just dumb.
That's my ex-husband. Boy, I have to tell you, God love him. He died last September. And I know nobody regretted his loss, which is really too bad, because he wasn't such a horrible person when he wasn't drunk. But I've been ridiculed so often for describing him that way, but I'm not kidding. That is exactly what he was like. Friendly, loving, wanted to be petted, couldn't let him in the house. He'd crap all over the place. He'd crap all over your life, I'm telling you. He did mine. So.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, it's all right.
That's just how some things roll.
I never asked for that.
Oh, I was going to ask you, have you heard Ernie Davio's account? I know there's so many different accounts and stuff. His happened. His is really interesting. His happened. I want to say it was Vermont. I can't remember the location. It was like a hill or mountain or something. And you might be familiar with Sabella Irwin. She does all the incredible illustrations. Yeah, she did his illustration, and he was out there hunting, and like this thing spotted him, and it kind of did a double take and surprised he was there, and it went up to him, and it kind of did this because it saw that it had a firearm, and then it got close to him and did this, pointed at him, and then it pointed at him or itself, and it eventually, I want to say, it was like maybe a few feet from him, but it was kind of like talking to him the way an adult would a toddler, where it's like it didn't speak, but it's like using its hands, where it's like, where did you come from? Like, how did you, I didn't see you. And and then at some point during their exchange, it went over to another one that he saw, and it started like, samurai chattering and going off on this one. And Ernie was told me that basically it was like this thing was chewing this other one out, like, you know, like, I'm trying to get this deer. How did you not see this human? And then it pointed to Ernie, and the other one looked at Ernie and went, you know, kind of had a shock look, like, too, like, how did we miss him? Like, what? It was just, you know, like, but the illustration, it looks like a human, bright blue, husky eyes. It's like, that's a person. Wow. It's just, it's wild, you know. Then you get some of these, descriptions that they look like Patty, you know, or some of them have like the ape kind of nose, and I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know why there's such a distinction between like the different facial structures and the way they look. I mean, not just like, oh, like they're like people, but I mean like giraffe, like different almost beings.
right. Yeah,
that I don't know.
I mean, yeah, if you look at what the descriptions for the southern, you know, the boogers and the skunk apes and things like that, they're close enough to be the same general thing, but they really are not patties. And they're definitely not what you find in the northeastern United States, because those seem to be very human-like. And they also seem to be more communicative with people, you know, when they do have their interactions. And yet, that's where the Bennington Triangle is, and that's where the other one is. There's two triangles up there. One's in Massachusetts and one's in Vermont. Bridgewater. The Bridgewater Triangle. That's the other one. Bridgewater's in Massachusetts. Bennington is in southern Vermont, maybe a little bit in New York and New Hampshire. Bennington has, that's the red coat thing. And I'm a flannel shirt person. I'll wear flannel shirts in the middle of summer. And you rarely see me. I'm like Mr. Beast or whatever. Not Mr. Mr. Ballen, Mr. Somebody. I've always got my flannel shirts on. And I quit wearing my red flannel shirt in the woods because the first person who disappeared was a young college student, and she was wearing a bright red jacket. And then there was a boy who was taken from a vehicle. He was like 8 or 9 years old, and he was wearing a red jacket or a red shirt. And so, yeah, Bennington Triangle taught me not to wear red in the woods.
Oh, time to change my shirt.
Yeah. I do. I just leave my red flannel shirt at home. I wear the green and black or whatever. But I think that those interesting, bizarre little things that people pick up, you know, like I know not to wear red in the woods.
What do you think about the missing 411 phenomena in regards to the theory that there's cave systems that people are being brought to?
I firmly believe in the cave system thing. One of my favorite stories, of course, is the Headless Valley up in Canada. I hate my brain sometimes. The native people who lived in that area shared a name with what the Navajo people call themselves. The Dene. Yeah, the Dene people. And they think that there is a serious web of caves that could actually reach between the two areas, thousands of miles apart. Of course, where I live, we have the biggest cave system in the United States right up the road from me, whatever it's called. It's right there in Kentucky. I go by it all the time. Mammoth Caves, yeah. And I think that they connect. I think they connect across the country. I think that that's a really good system of travel for something that doesn't want to be identified. As far as the actual 411 phenomenon itself, I think it's human nature. Even if you're not willing to name the culprit, I think it's human nature to be biased one way or the other. And I think David Paulides has a tendency to be biased. And sometimes I think that he just wants this to be a missing 411 bad enough that maybe he'll I don't want to accuse him of lying because I don't know the man. I was at one conference with him and I didn't even get to talk to him. So hang on, I gotta adjust. But the man was I would take every story in his book with a grain of salt. And I don't think it's fair to say that they're all encounters of cryptids. I don't think it's fair to say they're all UFO encounters. I don't think they're all government cover-ups. I think that it's a really great collection of really bizarre stories, assuming they're all the facts are true. And I've heard rumors that not all of the facts are exactly facts. I love the fact that he's made that collection and he started people thinking. The thing that I love the most is the fact that he has brought things a little bit more mainstream than they have been in the past. And what I have encountered in the last 7 or 8 years, maybe even 10 years, that I never thought I would see, is a willingness for people to speak openly about this stuff and to really want to know more about it and to ask questions. And that's not just Bigfoot, and that's not just paranormal, that's not just UFOs. One of my favorite UFO cattle mutilations always fascinated me. And one story that fascinates me even more than that is the Cunningham Lovett story. And I think did I tell you the Cunningham Lovett story? Happened White Sands in New Mexico back in 1950s, about 5 or 10 years after Roswell. Okay, well, Cunningham was a major, and Lovett, I believe, was a sergeant or a corporal. I'm not sure which. And their job, they had a trash can job that they had to go out and collect debris after a nuclear test. What they were doing out there at night doing this collection, I don't know. But they drive the Jeep out to a point, they get out, they start walking. At one point, Lovett peels off and he goes over a sand dune. Cunningham assumed he had to relieve himself. And so Cunningham keeps walking and he's looking for debris and picking it up and doing his job. And about 15 minutes go by and he realizes that Lovett hasn't caught up yet. So he decides he needs to go back and check to make sure Lovett's okay. And he gets back to the sand dune and he's gumming up over it and he starts hearing this horrific screaming. And when he gets to the top of the sand dune, he sees Lovett being dragged by this long metal arm up into, and it's got a hold of one leg and it's dragging him up into the spaceship. And of course, he totally freaks out. He runs back to his Jeep. He gets on the radio. He calls in for help and he curls up in the floorboard of the Jeep and he just stays there. The help comes out. They start looking around for Lovett. They can't find him anywhere. He's barely, he can barely speak. He's in so much shock. They take him back to the base and they put him in a room and they interrogate him for hours. They're convinced that he has done something to Lovett and he's not willing to admit to it. Days go by and they're still convinced that Major Cunningham has killed Sergeant Lovett, and this is what they're just brutal interrogation. Then they find Lovett's body. It was 10 miles from where he was last seen by Cunningham. The time frame far enough away that from the point that they left the base, the time it took them to get to the point where they got out of the vehicles, and the time that it took Cunningham to call in the emergency. This man, he could not have gone 10 miles and done to Lovett's body what was done to Lovett's body and come back to that point and be there when the call was made. Lovett's body had all of the classic signs of cattle mutilation. He had missing genitalia. his rectum had been drilled out, he was missing an eye, and his lower jaw had been removed. And I find that utterly fascinating because we assume that it's all cattle mutilation, or actually the original one was a horse. I think the horse's name was something sad, like Lucky. But and we assume it's always animals, but it's not. There are people, there are cases where people have been mutilated, and those fascinate me as much as the missing 411 cases. And I don't know. I don't think it's fair to assume. My friend Wayne has a habit of telling people that he, what do you think about this Dogman thing? He'll say. And, and of course people are like, I just don't know. I can't wrap my mind around Dogman. I've never seen one. And until I see one, I'm not going to believe it. And Wayne always says, and I love Wayne. I do. I love you, Wayne, if you're watching. You're one of my favorite people in the world. But he always says, I just can't believe. I think that Dogman is mistaken identity. Now, anybody, especially back in my day, when I had my encounter, who has ever tried to tell people about their encounter, the first thing somebody's going to tell them is, you had mistaken identity. That was not, that was not a Bigfoot. That was not an 8-foot tall Bigfoot you saw in the woods. That was a 2-foot tall rabbit. What's wrong with you? And that's really disheartening. That's incredibly devastating to have somebody look you in the eye and tell you that you don't know what you're talking about. And so I told Wayne, I said, you don't have to believe, but be careful what you say, because that breaks people's hearts when you say that. It hurts them. And I know Wayne would never intentionally hurt anybody. He's got too big of a heart to hurt somebody. And so I don't know. I think I kind of hurt his feelings by telling him that. But my point is this. I had a Bigfoot experience. I know what I saw. And you can tell me I saw something. You can tell me it was a fox. You can tell me anything you want. I know it wasn't a grizzly bear because we don't have them in Illinois. Or we didn't then. I don't think that we do now. But don't tell me to my face that I'm lying to you. And I am not going to tell somebody who saw a UFO drag a man by his foot up into a spaceship that he didn't see that. That was mistaken identity. That guy was just doing a funky dance with one leg in the air. How dare you? I'm not going to tell somebody who's seen a Dogman that no, you saw a Bigfoot. I'm not going to tell anybody who believes with all of their heart that this is what they saw, that they didn't see it. And so I can see aspects of 411 that may be UFO related. I can see aspects of 411s that may be Bigfoot related or Dogman related, or, a million other things, paranormal. And I am not going to accuse anybody of being wrong because I wasn't there.
I was hoping you'd include your catchphrase for like, and that's what terrifies me the most. I loved it.
Yeah, I'm telling you. The sad part
earlier. You started doing it, and then you trailed off. I'm like, what? Come on.
The sad part is I'm such a chicken that everything terrifies me.
You look in our woods. There's a lot to be spooked about, especially. I know people always say, humans will kill you more, in more gruesome ways, and will kill you faster than any of that stuff will. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I see that, but
have a strong fear of human beings if you want, and you should, because humans are a very nasty creature. But don't use that as an excuse not to be afraid of the other stuff.
Right? Yeah. Don't undermine.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to take it back to the native stories here, that they all have, they're very particular about certain areas you just don't go to, or, again, even the LBL, they told the French fur traders, this area is cursed, don't go to it. You guys know what you're talking about. We've only been here hundreds of years. We know the area, but no, that's cool. You know what you're talking about. We'll let you guys figure it out.
You sure silly enough. Little people.
Yeah. And I know I'm jumping around here, but like I was going to say with the Pilates thing regarding all the experiences and stuff that he talks about in his books and just overall, I would agree with you that not all of them are. They're not. There's not always like some smoking gun behind each disappearance. Like obviously, I feel like everybody can agree that there are just some people that they fall down an incline or. They fall into a crevasse or like, something genuine that they get killed by a bear. But it is the weird ones where it's like, to me, it's the two where it's like, they're just never seen again. And unfortunately, the ambiguity of that kind of leads a lot of people like, well, and I'm like, well, hold on. Like, it could also be just natural stuff too, because it's like, if you get lost and you die and you're eaten, like, yeah, you're also never seen again.
Right.
But then there are the ones that, in my opinion, are the true strange one, where it's like, they find their clothes 7 miles up on a bluff, neatly folded.
Yeah.
And they're by like that. That's where it's like, okay, now at that point, it's like, that's not a cat. That's not a bear. It's.
I've never seen a bear full of clothes in my life.
And if he is, I want him as a pet because I got
I
laundry.
know, right? That's why I never chased the ghost out of the farmhouse. I needed her to fold my clothes for me. My younger son lives in Colorado, and where he lives is just outside of Colorado Springs, and there's a place called Black Forest there. And they've had some very weird light phenomena at Black Forest. He doesn't live in Black Forest, but he doesn't live far from it.
I think it is Colorado because I was told that I was saying it wrong when I said Colorado. I can't even say it. Colorado.
They both sound normal to me. I just think, it's like you can go to one part of the Appalachians and say Appalachian and people will lose their mind. It's not Appalachian. It's Appalachian. And then you come to another part of Appalachia and you say Appalachian and they're like, it's not Appalachian, it's Appalachia. And I'm like, get over yourselves, okay? I came from a town where Milan, M-I-L-A-N, is not Milan. Rio, R-I-O, is not Rio. Viola, V-I-O-L-A, is not Viola. Orion, O-R-I-O-N, is not Orion. So I don't care. You can pronounce it however you want. I don't care.
Yeah. Growing up, it was always Appalachian because I'm in the north. And for a while, that's all I would say that. And then I got schooled by the YouTube police. I was like, okay. So finally, I'm like, all right, fine, Appalachian. Then again, people are like, he can't even say Appalachian right. I'm not going to watch this. It's like, oh my. So then I'm like, okay, like, am I going crazy here? So I actually looked into it more. And of course, what did I find? More strife and arguments among people from like, no, it's this way. No, it's this way. Well, turns out folks, both ways are considered grammatically correct. There's no wrong. Well, I guess there technically is a wrong way, but both of them are. Yeah, acceptable. It's just regional. It's just a regional pronunciation. Right. There's nothing more to it than that. And so.
One of my favorite arguments to listen to people get into is my famous that I love bloody bone stories. And my uncle, not my grandfather, my uncle, my dad's brother used to tell those stories to the kids. And there's this great story about my cousin out on the farm. We rustic people. My uncle is sitting around telling the stories, and he's got the kids completely worked up. And my cousin David had this little whistle that he kept blowing. It's just irritating everybody. He just kept blowing the whistle and blowing the whistle. Well, my uncle got done telling the story, and David had to go to the bathroom, which meant going out back because there was no indoor plumbing in that house. And he goes out to the bathroom, and he's sitting there in the outhouse just tooting away on his whistle. And my uncle came and rattled the chains and got bloody bones. My cousin bit through that whistle and knocked the door off the outhouse. He was like 10, 12 years old. But one of my favorite stories is about bloody bones because you can get people from Appalachia to really fight with people from the Ozarks over whose story that is. Because the Appalachians will tell you, or Appalachians, whatever, they'll tell you, no, that came from us. That's our story. And people in the Ozarks, no, that's our story. And neither one's correct. It's an English story. It goes back to England before the United States was ever even a country.
I think they forget that there was a lot of colonists. Like when we came over here, it wasn't just English. Though. Like there were Dutch, there was Scottish. There was, it's like there was, and then of course, over the years, you had oh my gosh, French, but sort of the C. I can't even say the word.
The Cajuns, the Creoles.
Thank you, Creoles. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, the Cajuns and the Creoles, and like you had there's a lot happening on the east side there. And and with that, a lot of intermixing of language and
what is the
stories, culture? That's what I was saying. Culture, stories, traditions, folklore. Like, yeah, I'm sure stuff is gonna get.
What is I'm looking it up because my mind won't work.
You ever seen that meme where it was it's like one of those old moonshine distilleries, and the image says, "Nah, officer, we was just making hand sanitizer."
Yep. I went to my old. This is a joke. I'm so sorry. This is not going to be included. But I went to my older son's military graduation in South Carolina, Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and a friend of mine went with me. She's well aware of my need to wander around after dark in places I shouldn't be. And I told her that I wanted to go looking for Goatfoot. And she's like, "What's Goatfoot?" And I described him to a T. And I said, and we need to find him because he's known to be in this area. And so we drove around. I mean, we didn't get out of the car or anything. We just kind of did a little road running. And we went back to the hotel that night, and I was so disappointed that I didn't find him. And I woke up the next morning and I said, "You know why we couldn't find Goatfoot?" She said, "Why?" I said, "Because it was Lizard Man." I was looking for the wrong thing, the wrong place. So yeah, not stories.
My bad. Oh, come on. That's got to be in the episode.
That was a good one. My goodness. Yeah, you can put it in if you want, but that's, my friends, they're used to, sadly, me traipsing around and finding weird things. I'm going to New Orleans in November. Over my best friend and I have been friends since we were 2 years old. In fact, I told you about her way back when we started this. And we both turned 60. She turned 60 in January, and 12 days later in February, I turned 60. And to celebrate, we are going to New Orleans together this year. And we are so excited. She for one reason and me for another. And she said, "What do you want to do when you're there?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, well, I want to go see the Gates of Guinea." Is that right? Have you ever heard of that? It's a voodoo sort of gates of hell type thing. I want to learn about the. Do you know the story of the devil baby that was raised supposedly by Marie Laveau, and the baby was actually funded, like Marie Laveau was funded by Delphine Lalaurie. And of course, Madame Lalaurie, she had a famous, so to go back and fill in the blanks, Madame Lalaurie, for those who have not seen American Horror Story, was a woman who lived in New Orleans leading up to, it was pre-Civil War, probably 1850s, early 1860s. Her husband was a doctor, and they were very, very well thought of members of pillars of the community, so to speak. And their mansion in town caught on fire, and it was right in the heart of the French Quarter. And they put it out, and then when they went in, they discovered that how it had caught on fire was a slave had literally caught the kitchen on fire, and her reasoning was she had been chained to the stove, and for years she had never gone more than 10 feet from that stove. That was her life, and she decided she would rather be dead than to have to live another day chained to that stove. Furthermore, when they got upstairs in the attic and down in the basement, they found slaves in cages that had been mutilated, and people that were stuffed into cages where they couldn't straighten out, and they had been left there for months at a time, and they had been tortured. And Madame Lalaurie was she was, I don't know, her husband was a doctor, and you would think that naturally people would say, well, it had to be the husband. He was a doctor, right? A scientist. He was doing experiments on these people. But for reasons I'm not 100% sure about, she was blamed for the torture. And she and her husband snuck out of town and disappeared, and they escaped justice. The interesting thing is, leading up to that, apparently Delphine Lalaurie and Marie Laveau, the famous voodoo priestess, had a really good relationship. And Marie Laveau, there's a story of a young couple who, she was a beautiful young girl, and he was from Scotland, and he was in fact a member of the family that the Queen Mother, Elizabeth II's mother, came from. And he came to Louisiana, and he met this girl, and he courted her, and he loved her. And I don't know if he wasn't a good person, and he left her high and dry when she was pregnant, or, sorry, that was my stomach, or whatever the case was, they had a baby. And this baby was a devil baby. This baby had white skin with red cracks all over it, and it had horns, and it was horrible, horrible baby. And, I do remember the story. I'm telling it all wrong. She married this man, but she left a man who loved her deeply, to do so. And this man went to Marie Laveau, and he asked him to curse her. And when she died giving birth to the baby, and the baby was this devil baby, and her mother gave the baby to Marie Laveau. I'm sorry, I didn't tell that very well. And Marie Laveau took the baby, and she raised it. And she apparently, Delphine Lalaurie actually funded her, helped pay for the raising of this child. Now, there's a disease called Harlequin, I want to say ichthyosis, which is a very bizarre looking skin disease. You can actually Google babies who have it, and you'll find all kinds of pictures of children who have this disease. And it is a very, very bizarre looking disease. You can see where a baby that would be considered a devil baby. But she raised this child, and with the help of Delphine Lalaurie. And apparently the child, there's so many legends that the child was actually baptized at the gates of Guinea, that the child eventually wound up being buried in the back of, what is the famous cathedral there? Is it St. Thomas? No, not St. Thomas. St. John? Oh, St. Pat? No, it's Saint somebody. I don't know, somebody that got canonized at some point. And that the child was actually wound up being buried in the back of that church. And it's one of the many, many legends of the New Orleans area. And it's something that I want to, of course, investigate. And then, of course, while I'm there, the very famous Honey Island swamp monster. And the Honey Island swamp is not that far from there. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but Miss Dana Holyfield's house burned, I think about a year ago. And she's in the process now of finally getting it renovated. And she's been putting up a lot of stories on her own YouTube channel. And I would love to be able to I interviewed her a few years ago, and I'd love a chance to get to meet her in person. But because she's, had the fire and everything, I hate to reach out and bother her. But so, yeah, all of my friends are quite aware of my bizarre interests, and so my friend Amy was like, yeah, sure, yeah, that sounds like fun. We'll do that.
I want to have another one with you, bring you back and do stuff, but I know you got to run. I got to run too as well. Would you like to go ahead and like leave a closing statement?
Yeah, I said something really profound last time. Can't we just say that again?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Yeah, you don't have to say anything. You just like, no, I don't.
No, I don't. But you know what? Let's get together again soon, because I have loved this so much. I really have.
Yeah.
This has been so great. We need to do like a monster bash sometime where we do, like I'll throw out a monster and you throw out a monster and I'll throw out a legend and you throw out, just to see how many we can come up with. Should come to the LBL this weekend. Get on a plane, come down. I'll pick you up in Nashville and take you with me.
I know you would. I know. Yeah. I would just call you. Like, hey, come get me.
Yeah. Next time if you're in Nashville, just call me and I'll take you up there. And I'll show you around. It's a beautiful place.
Well, I'll tell you what. Next time I come to Nashville, I will ring you.
All right.
I seem to have a lot of like people that I know in like that area, so I'm like, we'll see what happens. But if anything, I'll take you out for some coffee. We'll do something.
Sounds
we'll
good.
go explore something cool.
We'll go to the Frothy
awesome.
Monkey.
Go ahead.